Hello, Daniel the naturopath. I wanted to talk to you today about fertility and how it was prepared 1 year before conception by the Native American tribes and other civilizations in order to have a healthy childbirth and healthy child. So I'll just read from the book, The Mysteries of Nutrition, on this small page entitled For Fertility and a Healthy Birth, in the chapter called Nutrition as Remedy. So I'll just read here and then I'll add alongside of that anything that comes up. So, for fertility and a healthy birth for men and women. Fertility is addressed 1 year before conception according to the traditions of many indigenous cultures. Find a homeopath, bullet point. Find a homeopath who is trained in the Sankaran system vital sensation method through rajansankaran.com or by searching online for an able practitioner who can help you find your fundamental unique remedy. Point number 2, an abundance of soy-free, fertile, or farmer's eggs or duck eggs without restriction unless allergic. Any way you like. For the best digestibility, you can poach for 3 minutes in a small pot with half white vinegar, half water, then strain on a towel or mesh. I prefer to boil eggs, keeping the yolk raw, then serve in a ramekin with unfiltered olive oil, Frontier brewer's yeast, and a spoonful of fish eggs in the place of using salt. You can also beat the eggs with Devon double cream, imported from the UK, which can be found pretty much everywhere, in specialty shops. For fluffy French-style omelets, another option is learn to make authentic Spanish tortilla, which is omelet basically, which they contain it in itself to where when you cut into it, they're still liquid a little bit, and so it keeps some of the vital properties in the egg in their raw state to a certain degree, and this is important for a daily practice. A cheaper way, or less expensive way, I guess, to do that same omelet is just to do kind of like a quiche. You could use potatoes and eggs, or just eggs, and do that with cream, and maybe, cream potatoes with eggs would probably be the easiest, and then you can just put that in a bowl, like a glass bowl, and cook it in the oven, and it will cook in the right way to keep some of the inside more liquid. And then you can kind of flip that over and put in it serves. It looks like a perfectly dome, like a little dome. It's kind of cute, and it's the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, you have to learn to flip a lot, and you have to have the right, very small carbon, pan that has little olive oil in there so nothing sticks, and so it has to be seasoned to right. And then you can do it that way, and you have to flip constantly in order to get just the outside to congeal while keeping the inside kind of raw. But anyway, all of these methods allow for one to retain daily some of the raw vitamins of the egg. Next bullet point: fermented cod or skate liver oil plus Alpine Activator X butter oil, royal ice gel in parentheses, from Green Pastures Company, or even better, Botarga fish eggs, which is like these fish eggs in a little wax pouch that are very popular in Italy and Greece and Jewish community as well in Europe, Tunisia, etc. But they're less well known in America. I know they do have a company that makes them in Miami. They're not imported. They're actually from mullet fish in Miami, so that's a local, I guess, source for it. But either way, some Italian importers, you can find these pretty easily or online. So Botarga in fish eggs, which are fish eggs, it's like a fermented type of fish egg, I guess you could call it, in conjunction with foie gras. Now, foie gras is illegal in California, but foie gras actually has a very important vitamin inside of it that is one of the reasons they're trying to stop foie gras production. To keep this vitamin from being available. These foie gras farms are popping up all over the U.S. and in the world, and they're actually doubling. Foie gras presence in the world is doubling in the last 20 years. So the reason is because we can't find this vitamin K2 in abundance anymore in our industrial society. So whether they know it or not, they're outlawing it as misguided intentions for sure. So the Phoenician culture found the equivalent of Weston Price vitamin X butter oil and his cod liver oil. So this was like the vitamin X K2 is found in the foie gras in high quantity, and the cod liver oil is like a fermented hydrosoluble and vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D. It's like a fermented vitamins, and it's funny when you eat the botarga, you have the same kind of sting in your throat as when you take the fermented cod liver oil. So there's kind of a connection between the two, and there's active selenium and things like that, which are in the botarga, which are important. So these two items are eaten at most Jewish festivals in Europe today. Botarga contains the fermented vitamins and active selenium, and the foie gras, the K2 and K4 X factor. Great for fertility, especially when taken together. So every Jewish festival has these throughout Europe. 3 or 4 times a year you'll see this botarga and the foie gras associated. And so what have they understood? Throughout centuries they've understood the key to fertility is the combination of these two things around the same period. So, or at least in seasonal doses, if not more. I mean, you can eat more than that if you can afford it or if you can find it, because it does still have therapeutic value up to a certain point. But as long as you get it 3 or 4 times a year, you're already a step ahead of the game. So, let's see what else we got here. Next bullet point, raw butter, raw milk, raw aged cheeses like Swiss Gruyere, Norwegian brown cheese called Gjetost or Gjetost. The brand Ski Queen, for example, which has vitamin K2 cofactors, minerals, and vitamin A, D, E, and K. So in places like California where it's hard to find foie gras, this is Gjetost and maybe emu oil coming from Walkabout brand, which is like a non-refined emu oil that you can sip or eat out of with a spoon. The Gjetost Ski Queen cheese and the emu oil would, and the emu oil go together, and they could help complete like the vitamin K2, MK4 process. Like you could actually combine that to somewhat create the foie gras again, I guess you could say. The foie gras is still going to be stronger, but it's a way to pull it off when you don't have other options. So next bullet point, raw if possible, whole Jersey milk to make creamy curds, whey or homemade custard. Yes, if you can find high iodine milk. If not, put a high quality vanilla extract into the milk. Try to increase the iodine in the milk that way. As for butter, try to use, like I use this butter from Finland that I find in the grocery store, which is amazing. It has like such a body to it. When you cut it, it like retains itself. It has this kind of almost like taffy. You can like twist it, and so that's a very interesting butter. And it has like an iodine taste in the background. Like it's kind of like a standalone taste, where it's not just butter that's just this neutral whatever. So, but there's also other butters out there. French butter from Isigny. There's Italian ones. I mean, it's always imported. I always go with that. But I even saw one from New Zealand the other day, which was interesting. Learn to, and if you can't make the Jersey milk curds yourself, which is probably the best way, you might be able to find them at Farmer's Cheese at a Russian market to eat with a raw honey, and this could provide you with that. Get the high fat version. Usually they're like 15%, 9%, 5%. Get the 15, and that should be another way to do it without having to spend the time to do it that way. But sometimes the digestion is best when it's non-pasteurized and you have a real raw milk start on all of it. But anyway, you can look that up in the book, how to make that. You basically just let it sit for a few days until it becomes gelatinous a little bit, and so it's not that complicated. Then you strain it in like an organic cotton pillowcase or something like that. Learn to make water. This is another bullet point. Learn to make water by diluting broth, cucumber soup, or other soups, or with toasted nut or oat milks for more calcium and less acidity than a fermented drinks only regimen. A lot of people drink a lot of kombucha and all these fermented drinks all the time, and that can acidify the body. So you have to get the balance right with all that. Inexpensive and easy. Mix 20% rolled organic glyphosate-free oats found online only. Usually German and Swiss brands have tested well. Trader Joe's brand has tested well as well. In a food processor to make flour, oat flour. Then add 4 large glass bottles of spring water, a teaspoon of Celtic salt, and a hint of maple syrup or honey to suit your taste. Let sit for 12 hours, and then stir, then filter and strain. The pulp can be fermented, or frozen for later use, cooked in dishes, or cooked on a flat pan as oat crispies and served with butter. The Scots would pour cooked oatmeal into wooden drawers and let it ferment for weeks. Parentheses, quality wood harbors diverse bacteria strains. Store liquid in glass jars in the fridge. Kissel from Russia and Swats from Scotland recipes ask to ferment this drink, but it has also historically been soaked only for 12 hours in some traditional recipes. Some oats, especially non-organic but organic as well, may have glyphosate residues. In this case, the oat water will taste off. If you have optimal kidneys and pH balance, then you may not need this recipe at all. You can instead use imported glass bottled water and drink the water while consuming a large uncoated wooden teaspoon of raw honey. This brings minerals into the water to where the water is not just tiring the kidneys, making them filter without giving a sort of mineral to the kidneys. So it doesn't drain the body. It actually just is like a nice equilibrium. So this in-the-mouth mixing helps to soothe the kidneys with ready minerals woven into the water, especially in the summer heat. Next bullet point. Flattened or broken whole glyphosate-free oat groats soaked overnight in raw milk, quality yogurt, Devon cream, or with a small amount of lemon juice, then slow cooked 2 hours, plus butter, plus scraped vanilla pod, if possible, plus whole coconut sugar or unheated honey on a spoon. This mush can then be stored and sliced for later meals. For muesli, soak rolled oats. German, Swiss, or maybe Trader Joe's brands have tested well for non-contamination of glyphosate. Almond slivers, honey, or maple syrup, vanilla, and some fresh fruit or dried fruit for at least 24 hours in yogurt, cream, and or raw milk, and then consume cold without cooking. This is the Swiss way to make muesli. Next bullet point, German stone ground rye breads such as pumpernickel without coloring agents or malt, which reveals that they are slow cooked for 20 hours. I've only found one bread like this. It's at Whole Foods. It has a Jewish star on the side of it, and it's called Bavarian. That's the brand. It's little square breads. And all the other square breads from the same brand are not as good. It's only the pumpernickel, which is actually the good one as far as the 20-hour cooking process, etc. So true pumpernickel will last for months on the shelf due to the high vitamin E content, which is Fertility. That's why it's in this list, of the freshly ground rye flour. The high vitamin E content of the freshly ground rye flour and whole grain mixture, which is called kibble. Buy online in packs of 6, 12, or 24 if you can't find it at Whole Foods. Order only imports from Westphalia and Bavaria or from organic stores which import these directly. Russian shops may also have some good rye breads. Add some whole grain tahini. Crushed nut paste is better than liquid nut butters for the intestinal villi. In general, liquid nut butters are to be avoided. And a crushed nut paste or a crushed tahini, like a real one from like Greece or Middle Eastern countries where it's like kind of almost like dark in color and pasty, and it's not liquidy. These are kind of better. Not like halva, but closer to that. Put this on this bread in moderation, toast it with butter and honey, crumble into salads, used to absorb runny eggs, etc. Or eat with salmon, eggs, and butter in the morning. You can also learn to make your own bread using heirloom rye kibble and liquid sourdough cooked in a Dutch oven. So, next point, seafood, shellfish, oysters, clams, etc. for male vitality and for women too. Fresh cold water oysters are the best, but to save money you can buy fresh East Coast oysters or Pacific oysters in a jar, rinse and strain them, and place each one in an already used oyster shell with a dab of cocktail sauce for presentation. These shells can be used indefinitely. Jarred oysters, which have been purchased with around 10 days remaining before expiration, are the freshest. I prefer wild, but jar can work in certain situations as well. So next point, wild-caught fish, sashimi, Alaskan salmon, skipjack, tuna, haddock, mackerel, fresh squid, octopus, etc. Next bullet point, fish eggs with only salt as a preservative, parentheses, cod, mullet, salmon, trout, whitefish. If needed, salmon and trout eggs may be rinsed or soaked to reduce the intake of refined salt. I mean, that maybe if you're just going to eat a bunch all at once, maybe something like that, but otherwise don't rinse them. Make orange vitamin butter by smashing salmon eggs into some clotted or whipped Devon cream, unheated honey, gently melted butter, Frontier brewer's yeast, non-organic, which is optional, and let all of that reharden in the refrigerator. It's like butter plus the salmon eggs and the cream and the honey, and it makes this orange butter when it's run through the food processor. And then it rehardens in the fridge, and then you just slice this onto bread. It's like a high vitamin butter that you created because it doesn't exist anymore. These used to exist in nature. Midsummer butter was more orange or whatever, and so we don't have these non-industrial kind of gifts anymore, so we have to make them. So lobster roe and tamale, which is the liver of the lobster, which is in the head or the body. Never throw out the head. It has a white butter substance which is filled with pure vitamin D, called the butter of the sea, and a greenish to black tamale which has a slightly metallic cobalamin taste. It's like a pure B12 boost. You will feel alive for a few days after eating this, not to mention the long-term effects of vitamin replenishment. The vitamin rush will even work with frozen lobsters, which are less expensive but to a lesser degree. Especially if you don't overcook those lobsters, like don't destroy everything that's in there. I mean, they eat lobsters raw in many parts of the world. I'm not saying you need to go there, but there you can find a balance. Dulse may also be eaten in very small quantities. Seaweed tartare. So this is really big in France and Ireland, certain countries with a lot of algae and seaweeds. So this can be made using a combination of gently dried seaweeds such as dulse. One can add capers, pickles, and olive oil to the seaweeds to make a tapenade or spread. This iodine-rich food is great for vegetarians and vegans and is not necessary for avid. It is not necessary for avid seafood lovers. Dulse may also be eaten in very small quantities, less than a teaspoon every so often, depending on each's own need and intuition. Don't overdo this one. Next bullet point. Crab roe and its tamale, crab fat. The white meat is good, but of a lesser importance. There's iodine in it, but this crab fat, that's like a little red omelet that you find on the inside of the crab, and it can be found in males as well, but there's more of it in the female, and this is what people in Europe eat crab for. They don't eat it for the white meat. They'll eat that at the end, like whatever, they'll finish it, but I mean, like, it's mostly for this part, and this is the part Americans throw out, which was where all the vitamins are. It's the same with scallops. Scallops have this little orange tongue or foot that comes out, and that's where all the vitamins are, and we cut that off, and all you see is these white scallops, which is ridiculous because it tastes great, that little orange part. But anyway, so we've been badly educated around that, and so anyway, Botarga, dried fish eggs, 1 to 2 blocks per month minimum, hosting an array of fermented vitamins and active selenium. Order online from Europe, Canada, New York, or Miami. Next bullet point, pickled, smoked, or salted herring in white wine sauce or sunflower oil, rich source of vitamin D and calcium in the tiny bones. Avoid anything in soy or colza oil, which is usually labeled as vegetable oil, so that's a scam. If you can only find this item in vinegar, you may eat this way or strain and add unfiltered olive oil to reduce acidity. Fresh sardines or canned in virgin olive oil with the bones for calcium supplementation can be useful if you cannot find herring. I also find this at the Russian shop. You can find the whole herring. Sometimes you can find it cold smoked. Sometimes you can find it just the whole thing, which is defrosted, and now it's ready. And then you take it home, you cut the head and everything off, and you kind of make these fillets, and then you put them in olive oil and let them sit in the fridge. And then you can just cut them with scissors and make little cubes and mix it with like unsalted potatoes, because they're a little salty, so the potatoes counterbalance that if you don't add salt to the potatoes. So I use like cold potatoes that have been cooked, and then I take the cold potatoes, put them in the food processor with like sliced cilantro, parsley, things like that, mustard, and I create like a poke bowl, which I don't like in every situation, but in this one I do. And then I'll put like the herring on top of that and maybe some fermented beets on the side, and it's like a little Russian / Baltic or whatever kind of poke bowl, I guess. Next bullet point, unsmoked canned cod livers from Iceland, available in Russian or European stores. Next bullet point, foie gras from geese if possible, without preservatives, plus a bit of unheated honey or fig jam. Order online. Vitamin K2, MK4 explosion, especially if only half cooked or pink. Sometimes you can find local foie gras, the whole lobe, and people or butchers, they'll sell you little slices of it that they repackage and vacuum seal. These are ideal. You can eat these, even though some use a little bit of soy. The soy is actually further processed by this type of duck, and so it's less dangerous. They process it fully, I guess you could say. It's still in there, but in general, I've noticed it still has a vitamin positive effect, so it's okay. It passes. I mean, if you can import, it's the best. But anyway, so Jewish French tradition. Imported from better soils is also to be noted for foie gras. Walkabout emu oil can be a great alternative, although since protein may be missing from the array, Ski Queen brand or other caramelized cheeses, blocks, or Jitoast from Norway can add these protein cofactors to an emu oil K2 supplementation. Jitoast is also a great way to absorb milk minerals without full-on allergens. Full-on because it can trigger some milk allergens, but it depends on the sensitivity of the person. So duck confit with the skin, or artisan cured duck products, duck fat for cooking potatoes. I'd like to add that use duck fat, which is from Canada if possible. And the best duck you're going to be able to find is the Moulard duck, not the Peking duck. And these are more expensive. Usually they're imported from Canada. So this is probably the best way to get duck if you're going to buy it, because it's much tastier, and they have to be fed a little differently, which keeps them from being as industrial. Like, they'll eat more corn than soy or whatever it is. But they're a good race. That's the thing, is Europe has a lot of good races of the animals that we need over here. All of our races have become obese, and it's just all that watered down protein, and so it's just not the same taste or effect on the health. So wild salmon from Alaska, steak tartare every so often, made from grass-fed beef heart, Australian steak, bison, elk, deer, New Zealand lamb shanks, or small farm unsoy-fed animals, plus raw egg yolk, capers, and condiments. It is best to finely cut the meat yourself so that the tartare is fresh, not packaged. You may also sear each side rapidly if you eat tartare more often, as many cultures, including those of Europe, sear the edges of the meat before eating raw. Next bullet point, homemade chicken, beef, or fish broth, or lamb broth. 1 to 3 small bowls per day, or added to soups, sauces, etc. Organ meats once a week. Next bullet point. The toxicity of vitamin A reported in certain studies is correlated to the synthetic vitamin A samples used. Researchers seem to be wary of doing such studies on natural food sources because they would, and have, disproven such toxicity theories. This can be in the form of liver pate to make the liver more palatable. You can see the book for how the liver pate recipe. Organ meats can also be frozen liver. You can buy it like Whole Foods. I'm trying to think if there's any other thing to say on that. Yeah, it's impossible to import some of these things, so you just have to find the right, the organs are less affected by our bad USDA food prison that we're in. So the organs and the blood, in reverse order, are the cleanest parts of the animal. The blood being the cleanest, the most free of the proteins. The soy proteins would be in the blood. So using blood as part of a cooking strategy, like old Scandinavian, blood pudding, blood salt, all these things coming back into vogue, these are actually smart because they're giving us back more of a soil in our body. We're losing the soil because of the bad soil in America. We're losing that darkness, I guess you could say. So this is a way to get it back to a certain degree. Next bullet point, blood pudding or boudin sausage, morchia, which we just talked about. See recipe, black bread. The association of iron, saturated fat, vitamin A, and D optimizes the absorption of iron. This understanding is often neglected in many cases of anemia, especially since we know that natural vitamin A, retinol, helps the liver process iron. Use blood which is near neutral when cooked. Use blood which is near neutral when cooked and kind of sweet a little bit, like a sweet omelet kind of taste, to replace eggs in cakes or bran muffins for kids. The Portuguese mix blood with hot chocolate to fool children into health food. I use the easy liver pate recipe weekly, and I order soy-free livers from, farms in Philadelphia, Amish farms, which not all are perfectly, but the smaller Amish farms are good. Blood is like blood helps to overcome deficiencies in the American soil, as I said earlier. Blood is like a human soil, yet with a sweet, neutral taste when cooked. And blood from our world traditions will come back into vogue, as it will be the only way to overcome the too slow transition to better soil. Next bullet point, consume heirloom vegetables, smaller young vegetables, rustic salads, and root vegetables. Next bullet point, for a bread alternative, not to replace bread, that will give the same amount of energy without the carbohydrate-driven blood spiking effects. Grate, dice, or process some small organic rustic potatoes, then fry in an equal parts mixture of butter and olive oil. This potato hash can be served with anything. Also note that once the carbohydrates have cooled back to room temperature, their molecular structure changes. This is called resistant starch. From the healthy home-fried sugar-slowing effects of fats to the cooled-over resistant starch knowledge, you have a few ways to adapt to your sustained carburant energy needs without glycemic spiking, which plain carbs can trigger. Seek out 100% East imported rye pumpernickel spoken of in the chapter on bread as well, because a tuber should not replace a grain food all the time, as they each affect different parts of the body, one being solar and the other grown in the dark. I'm losing my voice a little bit because I was sick yesterday, the day before, and was getting something out, and so I'm still, but anyway. Next bullet point, have your root canals, lead mercury fillings, and other dental problems properly removed by cavitation surgery, replaced or investigated by a certified IOMT IABD dentist 1 year before conception. This is key to get some of these things out of there way earlier than conception, so that way you're not having, typically you can have bacterial colonies which are set up in an ipsilateral fashion on the side that you have the root canal cavity, the pulled tooth or whatever, and it's because there's bacteria that has infested in these made holes by the drills, which are impossible to fill perfectly, which even though we think we can, it's impossible. And then also the stubs of the nerves and things that weren't scraped out. And so these create serious problems, which can be like a virus in a computer. You'll have like 20% less energy and then 30. So these need to be knocked out if you're going to go through pregnancy. And you need a year in order to get out all that effect. It takes a while for those circuits, that circuitry to just die out once you remove the source. Use an EMF protected bed canopy, shield any smart meters, or install reflective wallpaper EMF protection material between you and these meters, and wear EMF reduction clothing, especially undergarments for the ovaries, the breasts for women year round, but also while pregnant. You can use boxers or something that goes over your underwear so you don't have to wash it every 5 minutes and use it as like a pajama or whatever. But it's really important also to go to antennasearch.com and check to see your address, to see how many towers are around you. Any towers that fall within 0.28 miles of you, you need to check the angle that tower is aiming at, and whatever wall it hits, you need to cover that whole wall with EMF blocking material. So you might have 2 walls to cover or whatever. Then it can be, if you're living way too close to the like 0.1 miles or whatever, you might have to move out, seriously. Otherwise, it takes a much more professional situation, like with 3 layers of EMF paint, magnetic shielding, which are like plaques, these metal plaques, and the EMF curtains, and it's quite a process. So if you're at 0.28, you're okay, but if you're within 0.28, you need to protect yourself, not only your own body, but even your bed canopy, where you sleep, and everything else. Now, the ground floor is going to be better in most situations than the upper floor because of the nature, how the waves radiate above ground. But anyway, keep that in mind. It's very important. Go to antennasearch.com and look up your setup. So, and then the last bullet point, love the man, woman, and child within yourself. So yeah, these ideas are, they're not radical, but they seem radical because we're not used to this. So all this soy-fed animals that we have, almost every egg that every American eats today comes from a soy-fed chicken, a highly soy-fed chicken, even the best, even the ones in Whole Foods, even the best. The only ones that don't have to be labeled soy-free and corn-free. Otherwise, there's a potential for glyphosate in the corn, even if it's genetically non-modified corn or organic corn. They still can sneak glyphosate in there, and this has been discovered for the last 20 years. They've been discovering this sneak attack. So the only way to get around that paradigm is to order glyphosate-free, corn-free, soy-free chicken eggs online, or to find them locally if possible. So these contribute the egg is the essential key to life, and without it you can't produce offspring properly either. I mean, the Chinese used to for their wives, they would just eat it. They would buy them with however much money they had. They would use to buy them as many eggs as possible, 10 a day, etc. When they were getting pregnant or they were going to conceive. So this old tradition is not BS. It's like real. And so good eggs are a key, and eating a lot of them is a key too to fertility. But you have to have good eggs, and that's why people aren't eating eggs as much anymore, because they're bad. So you got to get these soy proteins, these fake estrogens out of your body, because they mess up the hormonal system, and get the good estrogens coming back in. I could also mention it would probably be good to use some chemotherapy for women. I think it's the buds of, what's that plant? Raspberry buds that you buy from Herbal Gym. These are the only ones I recommend. They're $65. This helps get your cycles and everything, the progesterone and estrogen working properly. So that's another smart idea. And you can also use royal jelly if you buy enough of it to where you can kind of get an estrogen boost as well to get you started moving along as you're during conception period. So hopefully that can be of help to you. This is all real. It all works. You just have to put it to use and get free. Thanks.